On Easter Sunday, 1532, a Franciscan friar stood before Henry, ate, and made a prophecy that stunned the court. The king would end up like the biblical king Ahab, and dogs would lick his blood. 15 years later, something happened during Henry's funeral procession that many believed fulfilled those exact words. This is the documented story of what allegedly occurred and why historians still debate it today. On Easter Sunday, March 31st, 1532, Friar William Peto stood before Henry VIII in the chapel at Greenwich and delivered a sermon that would echo far beyond the walls of the court. Drawing from the story of King Ahab in the Book of Kings, Peto warned the king against the path he was taking, against the divorce from Catherine of Aragon and the favor shown to Anne Boleyn. Peto spoke with rare boldness, likening Henry to Ahab, the biblical king who ignored true prophets and met a violent end. According to near-contemporary accounts, he cautioned that rulers who listened only to flattering counselors risked disaster. The Spanish ambassador Eustace Chapuis reported that Peto's words, though veiled, left the king deeply displeased. Later retellings, most notably by Nicholas Harpsfield writing some 20 years after the event, preserve a more vivid warning that if Henry persisted, he might share Ahab's fate, and that the dogs lick your blood as they did his. While Chapuis's original dispatch does not record this exact phrase, Harpsfield's account has shaped the tradition ever since. The image of dogs licking a king's blood, a sign of divine judgment, would become inseparable from the legend that followed Henry to his grave. The immediate response was swift. Peto was placed under arrest, confined for several months rather than executed, and then allowed to leave England for exile in France. His refusal to recant or punish his fellow friars put him at odds with the crown, but ultimately spared his life. The episode left a mark on the court, fueling both fear and fascination with the idea that a king, no matter how powerful, might not escape the judgment of history or of God. A single moment in May 1536 would shape the remainder of Henry VIII's life and ultimately his death. During a joust at Greenwich, the king was thrown from his horse and crushed beneath its weight. The injury to his leg never truly healed. What began as a deep wound soon became a chronic ulcer, refusing all remedies. Over the next decade, this wound would fester, draining Henry's strength and, by many accounts, his spirit. As the years passed, the effects of the accident grew more severe. The king's mobility declined sharply. He took to using a tram, a type of early wheelchair, when he could no longer walk unaided. Royal wardrobe accounts from the late 1540s record the construction of reinforced chairs and wide-legged hose, tailored to accommodate his swelling limbs. By the end of his reign, Henry's weight had reached an estimated 28 stone, or nearly 400 pounds. The court physicians, bound by the Treason Act of 1540, rarely spoke openly about his condition, but the evidence of decline was plain to all who saw him. The king's body, once celebrated for its athleticism, became a source of constant pain. Reports from the period describe his legs as ulcerated and foul-smelling, requiring frequent bandaging and, at times, surgical intervention. The strain on his heart and organs would have been immense. These physical realities, more than any legend, help explain what might have happened to his coffin in the days after his death. A body weakened by infection, trapped within layers of lead, set the stage for the mysteries that would follow on the road to Windsor. A king's final hours in Tudor England unfolded behind locked doors and drawn curtains. In January 1547, Henry VIII lay dying at Whitehall Palace, surrounded not by a throng of courtiers, but by silence and carefully controlled access. The Treason Act of 1543 made it perilous, even for royal physicians, to speak openly of the king's decline. To predict a monarch's death, or even to suggest it, risked charges of treason, a threat that cast a pall over the sick room and left few willing to record what they saw. The official record is sparse. No bedside diary survives from the king's doctors, and the Privy Council minutes for those days are silent on his condition. The law did not require a formal gag order. Centuries of custom and the shadow of the statute were enough. Meals continued to be delivered to the king's chamber, and the routines of court life carried on, preserving the illusion of royal vigor even as Henry's life ebbed away. Archbishop Thomas Cranmer was summoned in the early hours of January 28th. By then, the king was drifting in and out of consciousness. Cranmer, unable to speak of death directly, instead offered prayers and asked Henry to give a sign of faith. The king pressed his hand in response, a gesture later recorded as his last conscious act. There were no grand final words, only that silent exchange between sovereign and confessor. News of the king's passing was withheld for 10 days. The delay allowed the Privy Council to secure the succession and prepare the elaborate ceremonies to come. When the death was finally announced, on February 7th, the court moved swiftly to begin the public rituals of mourning. Yet the secrecy of those final days, shaped by law and fear, ensured that the details of Henry's death would remain as shadowed as the legend that followed his remains on the road to Windsor. On the morning of February 14th, 1547, the state funeral procession for Henry VIII departed from Whitehall Palace. The spectacle was without precedent in Tudor England. The king's coffin, sealed in heavy lead and draped in cloth of gold, rested atop a great chariot drawn by 8 black horses, each adorned with velvet trappings and tall black plumes. Atop the coffin rode a life-sized wax effigy of Henry himself, crowned and dressed in royal robes, a silent reminder of the monarch's authority even in death. The cortege stretched for nearly 4 miles, winding its way through the city and into the countryside. Royal heralds, officers of arms, and hundreds of yeomen of the guard marched in formation, followed by nobles, clergy, and members of the Privy Council. The king's household servants and pensioners walked behind, heads bowed, while banners bearing the royal arms fluttered above the somber crowd. Wardrobe accounts from the period record the extraordinary expense: black mourning cloth for thousands, torches to light the way, and special liveries for the king's closest attendants. As the day faded, the procession reached Sion House, a former monastic site on the Thames. Here, the coffin was carried into the chapel and set upon a raised bier surrounded by burning tapers and watched over by a select guard. The choice of Sion for the overnight halt was both practical and symbolic, once a place of prayer and royal patronage, now a station on the king's final journey. With the cortege at rest and the coffin lying in the ancient chapel, the stage was set for the events that would soon pass into legend. Gilbert Burnet, writing in 1679, more than a century after Henry's death, offered the most famous version of what allegedly transpired at Sion House. According to Burnet, during the night, a foul liquid seeped from the king's lead coffin onto the chapel floor. By morning, he claimed, a stray dog was seen licking the fluid beneath the bier, a scene Burnet presented as the fulfillment of Friar Patau's prophecy. The detail is striking, but no contemporary account records such an incident. Agnes Strickland, retelling the story in the 19th century, heightened the drama, describing the leak as the king's very blood and insisting that the dog's presence was a sign of divine judgment. Both Burnet and Strickland drew a direct line from prophecy to supposed event, yet historians caution that these accounts rest on tradition and polemic, not on eyewitness testimony. Modern historians approach the Sion House story with careful skepticism, weighing both the vivid legend and the evidence behind it. Nancy Bealio, writing for the Tudor Society, points out that the dramatic account of dogs licking the king's remains first appears in Gilbert Burnet's 1679 history, over a century after Henry's funeral. No eyewitness from 1547 describes such an event, and Agnes Strickland's 19th century retelling further amplifies the tale without providing new sources. Forensic specialists explain that a lead coffin containing a body as large and diseased as Henry's could indeed leak due to gas pressure from decomposition, a natural process, not a supernatural omen. Scholars also note that Protestant and Catholic writers have used the story as propaganda, shaping it to serve religious or moral arguments. The consensus among experts is that while the legend is powerful, the physical evidence and contemporary records do not confirm its most sensational details. In 1813, workmen at St. George's Chapel uncovered Henry VIII's vault. The lead coffin was found cracked and partially collapsed, while Jane Seymour's nearby coffin remained intact. A.Y. Nutt's watercolor records the damage, yet heritage signage now labels the famous dog story as unverified. The physical evidence endures, but the legend persists, woven into the fabric of Tudor memory, retold and reinterpreted for each new generation. Centuries on, Burnett and Strickland's tales of the Sion incident remain debated. No contemporary evidence confirms them, yet their persistence reveals how stories of judgment shape royal memory. Today, as myth and evidence compete, history reminds us legends endure not for certainty, but for the questions they provoke.